So when we think about policy, we can think of it as a stabilizing factor in a potentially volatile environment within the government or public sector. We can see administrative changes, political events that can directly impact yearly appropriations and funding and plan leadership turnover and succession. Those are just a few examples. So really, policy can be there to protect the government, its mission, and its employees. However, as technology and innovation and invention continues to evolve and grow at the speed of ideas, the public sector has to find a way to keep up. We have to find a way to evolve our mindset and the way we think about everything, specifically as it relates around some of the policy and legal challenges that we face as we look at adopting disruptive ideas and disruptive technology. Because we know that the government, in some cases is not built necessarily to move as quickly. But in today's world, policy has to be able to enable change and evolution and to make strategic transformation happen, not prevent it. So we are blessed today to have these four panelists sitting with us, two of which are public sector leaders that have been no strangers to innovation and getting things done. We also have one of our consulting partners who work with government customers to be able to change the dynamic, change the space, and help them get things done. And we also have a great leader that has spent a lot of time in the public and private sector, but also on the Hill, who has been a driving force. So with that, we have Sue Gordon, Deputy Director of the National Geospatial Intelligence Agency, John Booth, Director, Website and New Media Group, Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services, Nishita Henry, Partner at Deloitte, and Rich Butel, Leader and Founder at Cirrus Analytics. And I'll just say a couple words. So Sue Gordon is really no stranger to innovation within the intelligence space. Whether it's championing commercial cloud capabilities in her current position, amongst other things, or her work as a leader at the Central Intelligence Agency to establish a disruptive partnership with innovative companies to deliver groundbreaking solutions to the intelligence community, a little something called InQtel. John Booth. John took on the task of providing the infrastructure that enabled healthcare.gov reach millions of Americans. John led the charge on breaking through policy challenges that would enable CMS to leverage AWS. Nishita Henry is a principal with Deloitte, digital focused on the adoption and implementation of digital processes and technologies, transformation of CIO organizations from order takers to business partners, and the discipline of innovation for continuous improvement. She's been serving the federal market for 18 years across defense, civilian, and health, and is currently engaged in cloud-related initiatives at Amtrak, Bureau of Engraving and Printing, and the Food and Drug Administration. Rich Butel is a nationally recognized expert in IT acquisition management and cloud policy, having served both in the public and private sectors. Among other things, Rich was the principal author and driving force behind the Federal IT Acquisition Reform Act, enacted in 2014. FITARA ultimately provides the legal framework that provides the budget flexibility to deploy critical IT infrastructure across the federal government. Thank you all for joining us. So we're going to go through a series of questions, and the first question is for Ms. Gordon and John, so you're up. So Ms. Gordon, what would you say was your signature win in the transformation space, and what was the driving factor of getting it done?
So at the National Geospatial Intelligence Agency, probably two signature wins in the offing. So the intelligence community decided in 2012 that it needed to huddle together for warmth to do two things. It needed to become more efficient, and it needed to create a modern technology stack. And that it needed to allow its organizations to interact much more effectively for the mission that we have, which is to kind of keep America safe for democracy. And it formed a thing called eyesight that many people have heard of. When the community decided to commit to that, that really opened up a lot of space. When I came into the job at NGA in 2015, a lot of work had been done on the wiring of it, but someone had to decide that they were going to actually use it. And so I decided, with the wisdom of my team, that we would do two things. The first is we would commit to moving to the cloud in 2 years. So just the decision that we are going to get off our own infrastructure and moved on to a shared infrastructure. Now we haven't, that 2 years isn't done yet, but to simply set that mark and have an organization moving in that direction is really pretty remarkable, because we can talk later about all the things that happen once you decide to do something big and you're committed to it. And then the second one is, once you're in the cloud, how can you provide your services that your organization does in a manner that's consistent with the new technologies there? So we also decided to change the business of what we were going to do in the provision of geospatial intelligence in order to take advantage of the infrastructure we have. So I think those are the two wins in the offing, but I will say what enabled it was big decision by the organization, led by a leader who just, well before any of us wanted to, forced us all to play. And then for NGA to just say, you know what, we're going to be the first one, just commit. And I'm going to throw off the bow lines, and we are going to go out, and we will be there. And it forces you to have to undo some things that you otherwise wouldn't undo, because moving away from the current is so difficult unless you have to have something to replace it.
Thanks, John.
Sure. Good morning. So for us, I think the big win for us, or success story that I would point to, came out of the experience with healthcare.gov. So in the fall of 2013, the site was having many, many problems. It was headline news every day. And our team sort of got the opportunity to do a couple of things. One was to build some new applications that would streamline the consumer experience on the website and take pressure off of the system that was experiencing those stability issues, those scalability issues. And we got the approval to build and launch those new systems in the cloud. So that was the first time CMS had moved any live production applications into a cloud environment. So again, we had a team, internal team, and some developers we brought on, built that application, launched that in the spring of 2014, and had a great success. And so we've continued to build on that, both applications that my team has built for additional functionality on the healthcare.gov website, as well as we've begun moving all of our other websites into that environment as well. But it all sort of originated from healthcare.gov in the fall of 2013. And I think for us, there was that was an event that enabled sort of the unthinkable to happen at CMS. So it was a great opportunity. There were things like cloud first policy in place that we were able to take advantage of, but I would echo you need that leadership commitment and somebody saying, like, I'm gonna let you do this, I'm gonna support you in this, and we're gonna see this through. Thanks.
Yeah, just to add on to that, kind of what it takes in terms of leadership, and I'm not gonna cite myself, but Jim Clapper, who's currently the DNI, in 2010 was the head of the National Geospatial Intelligence Agency. And in 2010, he said we should go to the cloud. How could I say again in 2015 that we would go to the cloud in 2 years if that had been done? So this notion of deciding that you will rather than you should is an incredible enabler of progress.
That's a good point. That's a very good point. Ms. Henry, so in your experience advising government clients on innovation and agile acquisition, can you walk us through an example where you worked with a client to navigate the sometimes challenging political sphere or policy sphere to adopt those disruptive technologies, et cetera?
Thanks, Steve. So sure, I'll go back to before Cloud First was even a policy, and to talk about the Navy that we worked with at various echelon levels, who was really trying to understand how they get cost savings and how they take money out of their infrastructure and consolidate data centers. And so their impetus really was a business decision about why they needed to start thinking about cloud. And they asked us to help them understand how to establish a cloud brokerage service to evaluate evaluate different clouds and to evaluate the applications that they wanted to take there, right? And so it didn't start with a I should, it started with a I will do this, and it started not just with leadership, but people in the organization willing to make a change, right? And so I think what Sue and John said is very applicable here, is that there were key leaders at the management level that said this is important for us and we need to go do it, but we understand that there are several things around it that are required to make it successful, right? Is the technical infrastructure ready that you have that you want to migrate over? Is the security at a certain level in order for me to feel like I can adequately do this, right, from a risk level? Is my acquisitions group ready to procure this in a way that is more utility-based as opposed to the typical write a statement of work and get something out of it, right? So we help them to establish this brokerage service to evaluate these various items and really help them move several of their public-facing websites to the cloud first. And that was the first entree of the Navy. And now we're actually helping them at the department level, because after Cloud First came about, right, the Navy actually put forth that cloud policy holistically, and we're helping now to do more of the governance pieces that are required to tie all of it together across the various echelons.
Thank you. So Rich, the government process was really not developed, way back when, to move very quickly at all. I mean, we see this through the annual appropriations process, strategic planning process, 3 to 5 years it usually takes. But from a congressional perspective, what can a legislature like Congress or even a state legislature, when we're referring to state and local, what can they do to enable the government to move faster or to keep up with this swell of technology at a rapid pace?
Well, I would initially note that there's an old saying that culture eats policy for lunch, and you have to get the framework right. But at the same time, you've also got to make concrete measures to implement it as well within the many cultural challenges that you'll have. I mean, many of us that go back a ways remember the Klinger-Cohen framework, and that was a very well-crafted policy framework for how government should acquire and deploy IT. But basically what happened in that context was Mr. Cohen went off to become the Secretary of Defense and Mr. Klinger retired. And so there was nobody left behind to actually ensure that that framework got the legs that it needed to get. So what legislatures and Congress can do is not only to create a proper framework, and to get over the cave people, the citizens against virtually everything that you're going to run into, and otherwise known as the institutional antibodies, and also ensure that it gets baked into agency culture. And that's why I'm very positive and very hopeful about FITARA, because Tony Scott, our federal CIO, has really gone the extra mile to overcome a lot of the FUD that is present within agencies. For example, commercial cloud is insecure or not secure, when in fact it's more secure than on-prem in many, many instances. And agencies need to be cognizant of the technology and the security measures and the like. But they are implementing FITARA in a way that I think is going to stick and which is going to drive culture in that context.
Okay. So moving on. And this question is again from Ms. Gordon and John. So as senior leaders in the government space and public sector, you do have a responsibility to protect data. You have a responsibility to protect our nation's secrets, constituent data, health information in some form. So cybersecurity and data protection and privacy, if you guys have heard of those, come up recently. They are some pretty hot topics and pretty hotly debated everywhere, to include Congress and in the operational realms. So for you guys as leaders, how do you strike that balance, or the right balance between taking those necessary risks and taking on that perception of taking those necessary risks, and all the while kind of owning the responsibility of moving what you're responsible for forward, especially in the IT and tech world?
Yeah, sure. So yes, agreed on all of that. Those are, security, privacy are very, very big topics. I've mentioned healthcare.gov. That site is a You know, it's a very high-profile target. There's lots of people looking at it. It includes lots of personal information. So, you know, verifying that when we moved to the cloud, we would be sort of at least as secure as everything else we were running was really, really critical. I think one of the things that our team did, you know, over time, we have put more and more functionality into the cloud. We sort of took a risk-based approach, and we started small. I mentioned the eligibility application that we built in the first year. That took consumers through a streamlined process. So the existing application that people were using in October of 2013 had 76 screens to it. The new application that we built had 16, so it took people through that application much more quickly. We launched that application side by side with the existing application, and we ramped traffic up to it very slowly. We started at 0%, we went to 5%, we went to 10%, and we left the existing application in place. So it was, you know, we had a very, very good fallback if we ran into any sort of problems, whether those be security or scalability or usability. We could sort of always fall back to the existing application. So we did that. Over time, we launched applications and things that ran sort of only in AWS and were the single source of truth after we had proven out that it worked really well. So I think it's very important as you move into the cloud to, you know, don't migrate 100% of your workloads in there on day one and say this is all going to work great. You have to pick something to sort of demonstrate that that's going to work well. I think the other thing that we've seen in the cloud that's been a great success for us from a security perspective is if you really sort of embrace the cloud model and you can sort of be building your infrastructure as code, what you can demonstrate to your security team is that you can actually audit all of that stuff and, you know, do code reviews and all those sorts of things that we do on application code. You can do that on your infrastructure code. And that's really sort of enabling and powerful for demonstrating that sort of a, you know, not only an equivalent security posture, but a better security posture in the cloud.
So everything he said, so I'm not going to come at it from that perspective. I'm going to come at it from my responsibility is actually not to protect my systems. My responsibility is to protect the interests of the United States. Right, and so I think one of the most interesting things is you have to start by realizing the conditions that we face today are different from the conditions when the intelligence community was formed in 1947. You know, the information that is out there, that is available for other use, I mean, there's just a lot of interesting things. So you have to me, nothing absolves you of the responsibility to protect her interests. From the CEO, C-suite, director level, you have to actually realize that this is all a risk equation. And everything we do every day, even though with existing systems, somebody else made that risk decision years ago, they made a risk decision. And so everything you need to do to move forward is another risk decision. You have to understand what those are. You have to be involved. You have to force your team to put those risks in front of you. To me, we are being so helped by technology right now. There are so many, whether it's the cloud or just security technologies, so many interesting things going on in terms of how you protect data, how you protect networks, how you protect systems, how you protect people, how you protect privacy, are all just advancing massively. But they all, if executed narrowly, as though they are the point, will not allow us to conduct the missions that we need to. So we have got to make sure that we, for our security professionals, define the operating conditions that must be affected, arm them and their staffs with the talent and expertise they need in order to be able to adjudicate, and then put the decisions in front of leaders to say, can we take this much risk? Because that's ultimately what it is. And so I think when you change that conversation and you allow with your folks the possibility that you're willing to have that, you get a new things open. Now, what's so difficult about this is most of us don't feel like the rules are ours to change one way or another, right? Little NGA, being a combat support agency and a member of the intelligence community, does not actually set the rules that we follow. So you have to continue to inspire the conversation, which is why, what I didn't say on my last answer, when you ask how do you get a signature win, I think you need three things to affect any great change. You need great quest, something that is so worth it that you're willing to overcome the inertia of what you've always done. For the intelligence community, to me, that's integration. I cannot imagine doing mission in the future if I cannot integrate amongst us. If I must integrate amongst us, then I need the kinds of systems and technology I have. So great quest. Great timing. I think people who innovate misunderstand how important timing is. You have to have the moment. Whether it's technologies are available or leadership sees it, I think we have timing here in this area. And then the last is leadership. Someone decide A or B. And so I think there's something really interesting about this moment, that if we can marshal our forces and focus on where we need to go, we will find the solutions to these things, even in the most difficult area of security, because I don't get to decide that I'm not going to protect the nation's interests.
I just wanted to follow up on that great comment. Government is a risk-averse culture. The average tenure of a CIO, according to GAO, is about 20 months. So what is the incentive for a CIO to kick off a major migration or transition activity when if it crashes and burns, he'll take the heat, he or she, but if it's a success, it's likely to be outside of his purview, he or she, their purview. What we have to do now, and what I'm seeing is a sea change, is the acknowledgement that not doing anything is a conscious risk decision. When basically we're spending 80 to 89 billion on IT, and most of the equipment across government is legacy, I call them fossil computers. GAO and the OGR did a hearing on this a week and a half ago and found many systems that were over 40 years old and the like. And most agencies are spending very little money on what's called DME, which is development, modernization, and enhancement. It's sucking up all of their resources. What is the motivation to do these large transitions under those circumstances? And that's where policy comes in and needs to break that logjam.
Thank you, Rich, and great comments. So, Nishita, we've been talking a lot about policy and sometimes how there can be challenges to innovation, but I don't want us to forget that the government has that the government doesn't always kill innovation. And I don't want to leave everybody here that, oh my goodness, government innovation dead. But, you know, because government has a rich history of driving innovation. So with that in mind, do you have any examples, or can you give us some examples of where you've worked with a customer where you saw a customer driven by business decisions and they were able to leverage the right technology to enable that relatively smoothly? Is there an example that you
Sure.
have on that one?
And I'm going to pick up a little bit on Sue's kind of 3 areas that are needed in order to enact this change. I'm going to talk about Amtrak, right? Amtrak had a clear quest. They have a clear quest. They need to get more riders on their trains, right? They're in an increasingly competitive environment with airlines and buses and automobiles, and they have an imperative to get more people on their trains in order to increase their profitability. Or they could quickly find themselves being privatized or going, you know, the way of horse and carriages, I guess. Second, timing, right? Timing from that perspective, technology is there, right? There are enablers to help them become more flexible and nimble. Customer experience, right, from a private sector perspective is the forefront of the conversation, right? So they've got those things going for them. And I'm going to change a little bit, Sue, just leadership, but empowered leadership. And empowered leadership at the middle levels of the organization that can make decisions and feel like they can implement change. And so I think Amtrak has those 3 things, and we're working with them now to actually implement a new customer experience platform. So how many of you have booked on Amtrak.com recently? Just a couple. Book more. They need more people on their trains. But there will be a brand new Amtrak.com in 2017, a new call center, new customer service applications for their station agents and call centers, a new mobile application, and new kiosks. And the idea is they're going to make an omni-channel experience, right? And they need technology to enable an omni-channel experience. And omni-channel being no matter what channel you go to, you get consistent information, consistent service, right? And consistent ability to do the transactions you want to do. And that all takes a technology platform that's flexible and enables them to do it, and it takes policy around the acquisitions of those various channels, around the integration of those various channels, right, in order to do this successfully. And at Amtrak, they started at the business. right? So instead of saying, I'm going to wait for my CIO to go do this, I'm going to wait for technology to go do this, business had an imperative. They said they needed to do this. Let me partner with my technology group. Let me partner with security. Let me partner with acquisitions so I can bring everybody along together, right? And I think too often we don't think of our own organizations internally as partners, but they really are in order to actually implement change.
Yeah, that's a really good statement. I mean, to go back on Sue's statement about the quest of integration. We've been talking about integration in the IC since, at least since 2001. And, where we live in a world today where technology can actually make that happen. And, coming from the intelligence community, it's been such a pleasure to be able to take a step back out of the operational realm and just see the leadership that is happening, that's happening at the highest levels that say, no, you will do this. And, commercial cloud computing is just one example of that, but it is encouraging, given the fact that I started my career where this mantra of integration and living it operationally, just to see it, how you can scale it, and it's very cool. So Rich, back to the congressional stuff. Actually, over the past few legislative cycles, we've seen the Congress include very pro-commercial provisions and statutory language that are actually directing the federal landscape to move to more commercial capabilities and best practices. The commercial and acquisition provisions of the FY17 House and Senate NDAAs are perfect examples of this. So in your opinion, in your experience, do you believe that the sense of Congress on technology innovation is resulting in the necessary policy and acquisition changes in the federal government?
I think the biggest challenge right now is to bridge the valley of death, basically between old legacy systems and the necessity to move to new and more modern data centers and the like. And this has been a problem that was identified all the way back to the first CIO, Vivek Kundra's 25-point plan. I mean, the problem is, as I've mentioned, the agencies are spending all their money on operating and maintenance expenses, leaving very little resources to do a transition and the like. And so I'm pleased to see this idea of an IT management fund, or ITMF, which would serve as a much broader series of budget flexibilities and working capital structures to allow the government to get out of this cumbersome appropriation cycle and actually transition over to modern systems, which you really have to do. And I think Tony Scott's been really brilliant about it by just calling out the screamingly obvious, which is basically you can't bubble wrap security around old legacy hardware. It has to be security by design, and the only way we're going to solve this security challenge across the government is to move into more cloud-based and modern systems that have security baked into their DNA from scratch. And so we've got to solve this financing problem and this cumbersome appropriations process. So I'm happy about that proposal, and I do hope Congress will find the will to move forward on that idea.
Steve, can I comment there for just a minute?
Absolutely.
So to the point of the legacy system modernization, which the government clearly is weighed down by, I think there's a great opportunity in that, right? There's a great opportunity to say, we don't need to do it the way we were always doing it, right? We can find a new and better way to do it that may be even better for the mission at hand. And that you can bring forth things like building in security from the start as opposed to trying to bubble wrap it, right? Bringing in design and design thinking around the customer experience from the beginning as opposed to just trying to take legacy systems and putting them in new technology, right? So while it's an enormous challenge, I think for those in the organizations, it's an enormous challenge and a great opportunity to really affect true change within the government. And I'm sure you guys have comments on that.
Can I add it?
Absolutely.
So one of the quests that NGA is pursuing is to succeed in the open. And that is, we've been an intelligence organization, secrecy information prepared for our use, polishing it, providing exquisite information to policymakers, warfighters who need it. And then the weirdest thing in the world happened. The commercial sector started doing geospatial information on their own and launching commercial satellites and making them available. And around those offerings has sprung up an incredible industry. Every single human walks around with a geospatial reference in their hand, and that makes a demanding user. And so there is so much energy in the private sector, so much capability that we can either be bold and altruistic, say, man, I need to take use of that to continue to be great, or I can be narrow and say, man, if I don't provide good stuff, everyone's going to use that less good but openly available. And so that becomes one of our quests that drives us to do this. But to the point of all the things that you can do to change, to introduce them, we all suffer from the exact same thing that everyone else is. Where's this engineering talent? You know, the government is made up of people who, by and large, not everyone, but the ethos was spend 30 years on developing systems that were prepared for our use by big partners who have transported us to places we couldn't have gone alone, but now they're part of that big thing too. And we're saying, you know, we're going to take it back. And the cloud's going to make the government make the decisions, and this is going to be so exciting. We can drop in payloads instead of having to build new platforms. And where's that engineering talent? And how do I bring that inside? And what risk am I assuming to become the decision maker? So it is so exciting what we can do, but one of the most interesting challenges is people, knowing what you will do and then knowing how to make the technical decision making to enable what is right there to grasp. And so I think that's one of the interesting challenges, to take advantage of what you say.
I mean, that's a really good point, because we talk, I mean, here we're talking about policy. A couple things have come up: culture and workforce. And culture and workforce, I think, can be kind of packaged a little bit together. But you know, we can talk about challenges, but they're also some of our greatest strengths. So it's interesting to see that push and pull as we continue to navigate how do we get good technology and good process in there. And so I'll leave this, we have one last question, and it was originally for Ms. Gordon and John, but all four panelists obviously can address this. Based on your individual experiences, what advice would you give to government leaders and policy professionals as they work to better understand the commercial technology landscape? How can those developing policy create the best environment that fosters innovation?
I feel everyone looking at me. So you have to have somewhere to go. You have to hold on to not what you have become, not the work you have been doing, but the mission that you have. So NJs Mission is know the earth, show the way, understand the world. That is a great mission statement. I'm pretty confident that when we were formed, there were a set of tools we had available that drove how we did that. And I'm pretty confident that in 2016 there is a different world condition that will inform how we do that. And I'm pretty confident that in 2030 there will be a different set of conditions. So as a leader, I think the way you stay up with what's happening is if you realize that what the work you do is always informed by the conditions in which you must operate, whether that is a changed security environment, whether those are opportunity costs, or whether it's technology. And if you do that, and if you as a leader are open to that, your people will jump to that if they realize that that's your culture. Now, I've leapt over how do you transition and how do you get people to walk away from the current. You spend money on the new. You have to change where you're assuming risk. You have to assume risk in the current to take away risk from the future, and yet we almost always do it the other way, right? I'll do the future when I get around to it, but I'm going to spend all my resources to keep doing what I'm doing, and so you have to flip that as well. So those are two practical things I think you can do to open that up.
Yeah, I think that's a fantastic point. You know, a couple things I think inside of CMS that we've learned. One is, you know, I think sort of a mandate to say everybody needs to move to this new thing right away. Again, that introduces sort of unnecessary risk. I think one of the things that we've seen is finding those teams that are ready and willing and excited and letting them sort of go first and learning from that and bringing that learning back into the organization to bring others on. In other words, you know, we don't push sort of everybody to that cliff edge at one point. The other thing is, you know, we've talked about a lot of sort of federal-wide policy. those policies get translated into very tactical things at the agency level. And so one of the things that we're working on inside of CMS now is really just revisiting all of the sort of architecture documentation that we've got, and making sure that that really does reflect the future. You know, a lot of our stuff was put together about 10 years ago, and is still sort of, you know, sound technical architecture, but for those teams that really sort of want to embrace the cloud first and you know, sort of new modern architectures out there, enabling some of that as well, and building the future of that application architecture so that, again, as teams are ready and as new systems are getting stood up, new legislation gets passed, we want to build that using not only a modern architecture of today, but something that'll look good 5 or 10 years from now.
So I'd say, to add on to that, because I think these are great ideas, is we've talked a lot about culture, and we've talked a lot about, you know, how do you actually implement and institute some cultural change, and I think you have to make people part of the process. And I think for actual true innovation, there are so many people at all levels in the government who have fantastic ideas, and we just don't know how to tap into them. And so we need to create a process of which we can tap into those ideas, and then make real decisions around, do I make this, or do I go buy it and adopt it, right? And then keep those people as part of that, as that process. So they have a great idea. How do I go and enable that great idea to come in? I can go out to industry and partner with them, because there are all those technology solutions and business solutions that are out there in the market. Adopt that into the organization, make people within the organization part of that, and start implementing it. So it's a combination of using the internal government workforce as well as the right partners in industry to make that happen.
I would say stop being a box hugger. Realize that going to the cloud is the next step, the next wave in, I believe it to be a tectonic shift going on in technology and in industry, and be willing to embrace it with the understanding that you don't need to control every single facet, because the private sector can often do a better job.
And you know, Nishita, you brought up a couple points about innovation doesn't necessarily, I mean, I'm paraphrasing, but doesn't necessarily come from the highest on being down. And we were just having that conversation about some of the differences that we've seen in our experiences. And again, on the cultural side, I mean, it's not necessarily driven by policy, but it is a certain kind of ingrained idea about what innovation can do, and what innovation is really there to do. And it's to further your objectives. And you mentioned, you know, the mission statement of NGA, which it's been around. I mean, we added the last statement a few years ago, but that's never going to change. But how you get there is going to change completely in 5, 10, 15, 20 years. And so it's a very, that kind of idea of how you get there is always going to change, but it's what you're getting to which is really important, and that drives your business decisions, and I think hopefully policy doesn't drive those. Policy enables those. And so with that, I think we're getting the countdown, but this has been such a great discussion, and I very much appreciate, and I think we all appreciate all of your insights and your leadership and moving forward, so please carry on. So thank you.
Thank you all.